Good evening and welcome to all who are joining us here this evening from around the globe. Tonight's class is dedicated by our dear friends David and Ida Schattenstein in the sacred memory of the Kedoshim of Mumbai, Rabbi Gavriel Noach and his wife Rivki Holtzberg, the ambassadors of Chabad to Mumbai in India, and the other Kedoshim who were struck down 1 year ago during the infamous terror attack in India. The Schattensteins also dedicate tonight's class in the loving memory of a young soul, Alta Shula Swerdlov, the daughter of Rabbi Yossi and Hindel Swerdlov, who passed away last month in the city of Jerusalem. Tehei nishmasam tzrura b'tzroir hachayim. This evening, we will explore what would seem at first glance as an isolated and not very significant verse in the Torah. And yet, upon deeper reflection, we come to see how this simple and innocent verse actually became a catalyst, a springboard for a major reflection on very significant ideas in the realm of history, psychology, and spirituality. We're going to begin with an intriguing and fascinating Talmudic story, but to appreciate and understand the story, two brief introductions are necessary. Introduction number one. In Vayishlach, in the portion of Vayishlach, the Torah discusses the genealogy of Esau, the older brother of Yaakov, of Jacob. We learn of his wives, of his children, of his grandchildren, and his family. One of Esau's wives, Ada, gives birth to a boy named Eliphaz. Eliphaz is the son of Esau, and his mother is Ada, one of Esau's wives. Eliphaz also marries and has children. But in addition to his marriage to a wife, he also marries a concubine. The concubine's name is Timnah. She, the Torah tells us in Vayishlach, is a concubine to Eliphaz, the son of Esau. Eliphaz and his concubine Timnah give birth to a son named Amalek. Amalek will become quite a famous and significant character in the biblical narrative of history. One more detail to remember. The Torah later discusses in Vayishlach the various chiefs and royal personalities who inhabited the country of Seir to the east-south of Israel before Esau and his family occupied and populated that country called Seir. And one of the chiefs' names is Loitan. And the Torah makes an emphasis and says the sister of Loitan was Timnah. So now we know who was Eliphaz's concubine. His concubine was Timnah, a sister of Loitan, one of the royal chiefs from a tribe known as the Chayrim, the Horites, living in the country of Seir before Esau's family occupied it. Introduction number one. Bear with us. Introduction number two. The king, to assume the position of royalty in Judea longer than any of his grandparents or grandchildren, was a man named Manasseh. Manasseh, the king of Judea, ruled for 55 years. He was the son of the righteous king Chizkiah. He was the father of the king Amon, whom we will discuss later. He lived 6 decades before the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash and the first Jewish commonwealth by the hands of Nebuchadnezzar, the emperor of Babylonia. Manasseh, who rules over the Jewish people longer than any other king, is also deemed as one of the most evil, cruel, and vicious monarchs in the history of the Jewish people. With these two introductions, we now come along. We travel along to a Talmudic story. Please open up your sources. Source number 1, right below the video, there is a curriculum and a source sheet in PDF. Please open it up to source number 1. Zag the Gemara tells us in Sanhedrin, Daf Tzadik Tes Amid Beis, Tractate Sanhedrin 98b. Tonu Rabbanon, the rabbis taught us, V'hanefesh asher tase b'yad Rama, when the Torah talks about a person who shall act high-handedly in betrayal of God, Ze Manasseh ben Chizkiah, this verse is referring to Manasseh the king, the Judean king, the son of Chizkiah. Shaya Yoshev v'doirish b'hagodas shel doifi. Manasseh used to sit and expound on the scriptural narratives in a ridiculous fashion. Omar, he once said, Timnah, did Moses have nothing to write in the Torah other than the useless, trivial fact that the sister of Leiton was Timnah? He is referring to the verse in Vayishlach that Timnah was a sister of a man, Leiton. This historical fact seems completely insignificant, irrelevant. Who cares? Did Moses have nothing to write in the Torah but such a verse? Who the sister of Leiton was? Timnah. V'Timnah haisa pelegesh la'esav. And Timnah was a concubine of Eliphaz. Pelegesh la'Eliphaz. Timnah haisa pelegesh la'Eliphaz. Timnah was a concubine of Eliphaz. Vayelech Reuven b'meik tzirchitim vayimtza dedoyim basada. Another verse that perturbed Manasseh. In the previous portion, Vayetze, Reuven, the son of Yaakov and Leah, Jacob and Leah, goes out, the Torah says, in the times of wheat harvest. He goes out to the field in the days of the harvest of the wheat. Vayimtza dedoyim basada. And he found dudoyim in the field. Dudoyim usually translated as mandrakes or jasmine or another type of plant. Reuven, the Torah says, went out during the time of the wheat harvest and he found mandrakes in the field. He brought them to his mother Leah. Rachel, her sister Rachel, saw them. She desired them. She asked Leah to share with her the dudoyim, the mandrakes. Leah does not want to. It's enough you took my husband, now you're going to take the mandrakes too. Rachel offers Yaakov to her for that night. They agree on the deal. Rachel gets the mandrakes. Leah gets Yaakov for the night. As a result of that, a new child is born, Yisachar. And Manasseh, the son of Chizkiah, is ridiculing these verses. Who really cares that Reuven went out during the time of wheat harvest and he found mandrakes? Is it really relevant? This seems like dry academia, dry, insignificant, random, trivial facts. Yotza baskel v'yamra. Loy. A heavenly voice came out and told Manasseh, quoting a verse in Tehillim, Teishev ba'achicha tedaber beben imcha titen doifi. Ela sisa v'echrashti di misa heyois eye chamoicha. You sit and speak against your brother. Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses is your brother. Your mother's son, you ridicule. If you do these things and I remain silent, you will think that I am like you. You will think that you can understand me. I will rebuke you and expose you before your very eyes. And the Gemara, the Talmud goes on to discuss another few details about Manasseh. Now the Gemara continues and asks a question. Now that we, however, came upon this verse, Leiton's sister was Timnah, what in fact is its deeper significance? Manasseh was ridiculing it and he was chastised from heaven. But his question is a good question. Why did Moshe tell us that the sister of Leiton was Timnah? Is it really important to know who Timnah was, who her brother was? What insight, what depth, what meaning, what law, what inspiration do we gain by knowing who Leighton's brother was, which family she came from? She was a concubine to Eliphaz, the son of Esav. No. So the Gemara says, let's understand. Let's really understand. Manasseh has a good question. And the Talmud answers. Timnah bas Malachim Havoi. Timnah was a daughter of kings. She came from a royal family, Diksiv Aluf Leighton. Because it speaks about Leighton in Vayishlach, and it says the chief Leighton. Aluf Timnah, according to some versions, is another verse. V'chal Aluf Malchusa b'lei Tagehi. Every mention of the word Aluf in Torah, chief, refers to a kingship without a crown. Somebody who was one level lower than a crowned king. The bottom line is, if Timnah was a sister of Leighton and Leighton was an Aluf, a chief, this means that Timnah came from a royal aristocratic family. And the Talmud continues with the story of Timnah. Boyelig Yurei. Timnah wanted to convert to the monotheistic faith of Abraham, of Avraham Avinu. Basei til Avraham, Yitzchak v'Yaakov, v'loi kiblua. She came to Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and they did not accept her as a convert to the Jewish faith. Holcha v'haisa pilegesh le'Eliphaz ben Esav. So she went and became a concubine to Eliphaz, the son of Esav, of course the son of Yitzchak, the son of Avraham. Amra, she rationalized it. She said, Mutov tehei shivcha le'uma zu, v'loi tei gvira le'uma acheres. It's better to be a maidservant to this nation rather than a princess to any other nation. As Rashi explains, she said, it's better to be a maidservant to this nation, the nation of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, who are Yirei Shamayim, who are fearful of God, rather than a princess to another nation. So although she came from royal blood, she came from an aristocratic family, her brother was Chief Leighton, Aluf Leighton, they were children of a king, nonetheless, she becomes a concubine, not even a wife, with inferior status. A concubine has inferior status to a wife. To whom? To a grandson of Yitzchak, Eliphaz, the son of Esav, the son of Yitzchak. Better to be a maid to this nation than a princess in another nation. Nafak mina, zog the Gemara, Amalek. From her came out Amalek, the Tsarinu Yisrael, who distressed Israel greatly. My time, for what reason did he distress Israel so much? Did he cause so much agony to the Jewish people? Because Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov should have not rejected Timnah. After everything, they should have not rejected her. And they did reject her. And she became a concubine to Eliphaz, and the result was Amalek, who loathed and despises the Jewish people. So now we see that this detail that Moshe Rabbeinu includes in the Torah and Vayishlach, the sister of Timnah is Leighton, the sister of Leighton is Timnah, is not insignificant. It's not irrelevant. In fact, if we understand the significance of it, it's very important. It tells us who Timnah was, the sacrifice she made, and the consequences of that. In fact, Rashi in Vayishlach, when the Torah says that Timnah became a concubine to Eliphaz, the son of Esav, explains, based on this Gemara, from this Gemara explains that the Torah is trying to tell us the great esteem in which the family, the Abrahamic family, was held to the extent that this royal woman chose to become a maid in the family of Yitzchak. Now the Gemara goes on to explore the message behind the second verse, of which at which Manasseh scoffed, and which he ridiculed. Vayelech Reuven b'meik tzir chitim. Reuven went out in the days of the wheat harvest. Amar Rav b'Reb Yitzchak, Amar Rav, Rav the son of Reb Yitzchak said in the name of Rav, Mikan l'tzadikim shein poishtin yedein begezel. From here we learn that righteous people are careful not to stretch forth their hands in acts of robbery. Because if he went out during the time of wheat harvest, why didn't he bring wheat? Why did he bring some inferior plant? The answer is because although he lived in an era when thievery was not considered wrong, nonetheless, wheat he would never take because it had an owner. What did he take? He took a plant which was ownerless, which was hefker, because tzaddikim will never touch something that does not belong to them. There are other interpretations. Rashi in the Gemara gives us another interpretation. Rashi says, what I said now is from Rashi in Chumash. Rashi here in Gemara says something else. He says that Reuven came after all the crop was harvested and nothing was left. So whatever was left, it was ownerless. But the bottom line is, why does Moshe include this trivial detail? Manasseh says it's ridiculous. He's teaching us something. He's teaching us about ethical behavior of a righteous person. Never touch that which belongs to somebody else, even if it may belong to somebody else. Tzaddikim ein poshtim yedayim begezel. They will not touch something that's not theirs. Then the Gemara goes on to discuss what Udayim are, but that's beyond the scope of this evening's class. A parenthetical note, the famous Tosfos in Masechta Yevamis, Daf Kuf Tesam at Beis Tractate Yevamis 109b, derives from this Gemara the law that if a convert comes on his own or her own with a true desire and yearning to join the Jewish people, then we are obligated to accept them, to welcome them. Usually we don't encourage conversion. On the contrary. And if a convert doesn't really want to convert, it is forbidden, the Talmud says, to pressure them and to impose it on them. Here, Tosfos says, was an exception with Timnah. She on her own wanted to do it, and therefore the Talmud says Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov should have accepted her. But let's raise the following question. Manasseh made it an important part of his life to ridicule the Torah, to ridicule the Bible, to ridicule Moshe Rabbeinu. As the Gemara puts it that we just learned, Manasseh ben Chizkiah used to sit, it was one of his careers, it was one of his hobbies. You see, it's not a modern thing. Manasseh already did it, would sit and make fun of the verses, show their meaninglessness, their ridiculous component in them, and so forth. Granted. Why these two? Why did Manasseh focus on these two verses? Or at least, why does the Talmud share with us his ridicule of these two verses? There are plenty of biblical verses before these and after these, which when you read them, you can ask a simple question. They seem irrelevant, completely trivial. Yet none of the other verses are quoted by Manasseh. Although presumably, if this is what he used to do, as it sounds from the Gemara, he quoted many verses and ridiculed them. It's these two that are chosen. Why these two? The question becomes stronger and deeper. Let's understand, Manasseh, as I said earlier, was not a righteous king. Not only was he not a righteous king, he was infamous for the evil, the cruelty, the negative, immoral, and unethical behavior which he introduced during his reign in Jerusalem. Let me just quote two verses. Open up your curriculum to source number 2. The famous pasuk in Divrei Hayam and Beis Lamed Gimel, Vayesem and Vayesem Manasseh Yehuda v'Yoshvi Yerushalayim Lasis Ramin Agoyim Asher Hishmin Hashem Epnei Bnei Yisrael. Manasseh caused the Judea and the citizens of Jerusalem to commit more evil than even the other nations living there, which were wiped out for the Jewish people. They became worse than their neighbors. They became worse than the inhabitants that lived there earlier. Source number 3. There's a whole chapter in Malachim, part of a chapter in Malachim Beis, Kings 2, chapter 21. Perek Chaf Aleph and Malachim Beis, dedicated to Manasseh. V'gam dam noki, source number 3. V'gam dam noki shafach Manasseh harbe miyoid ad asher milias Yerushalayim pel pel. A lot of clean blood, a lot of pure blood, Manasseh spilled until he filled up Jerusalem from mouth to mouth, from side to side, with the blood of the innocent. Innocent blood he spilled. Dam noki. We'll soon see what that means. Manasseh, we are told, was the one who resurrected paganism in the land of Israel to the extent he introduced the pagan idolatry into the chamber of the Holy Temple. Manasseh filled the land of Israel and Jerusalem and the temple with idolatry, adultery, murder. And for decades, not for a few years, his son Ammon was like his father and worse, but his son Ammon lived short. Manasseh was the longest king. And this is what he did. So I want to ask you a question. When the Talmud wants to describe the negative behavior of Manasseh, how does the Talmud choose to explain what was the evil of Manasseh and what prompted a heavenly voice to rebuke him? That Manasseh was sitting around and saying, you know, there's some extra verses in the Bible. This is really Manasseh? You're dealing here with a murderer. You're dealing here with an addicted adulterer. With somebody committed heart and soul to idolatry, somebody who undermined and destroyed the extraordinary righteous, spiritual and divine and religious accomplishments of his father Chizkiah, upon whom the Gemara tells us in Sanhedrin Tzaddik Dalet, Bikesh HaKadosh Baruch Hu Lasis Chizkiah Mashiach. God wanted to designate Chizkiah, Manasseh's father, as the Mashiach, but it did not work out, as the Gemara explains, for various reasons. This is the son who was in stark contrast, betrayed everything his father represented. In fact, the Tanakh tells us, the prophet tells us, it was in the days of Manasseh, the first time, when God communicated to his prophets living at the time and said, Jerusalem will be destroyed. The Beis HaMikdash will be destroyed. The people will be exiled. It was Manasseh who began the process of destruction, which concludes 6 decades later. When we want to capture and describe who was Manasseh, we say, you know what he used to do? He used to sit around and ridicule the Bible. Moshe didn't have what to do. He had to write this. Leighton's sister was Timnah. He couldn't write anything else. Moshe didn't have what to do. He had to tell us that Reuven went out to the field while they were harvesting the wheat, and he got mandrakes for his mother. No. Now we have to understand that Manasseh was no simple ignoramus. The rabbis tell us that Manasseh learned Torah's Koyanim 55 times. Manasseh mastered the tradition, the oral tradition on Vayikra, the book of sacrifices, 55 times. Each time he learned it with more depth, with more insight, corresponding to the 55 years of his reign. There's the famous Gemara. You can open up your sources to source number 4, Sanhedrin Kuf Beis Amid Beis. It's a fascinating Gemara. It also needs a lot of explanation. The Gemara says that Rabbi, the great Talmudic sage, told his students that tomorrow we're going to discuss the Shloisha Malachim. Source number 4, Reb Ashi Ukiya Shloisha Malachim Amal Machar Niftach B'Chavre. He told his students that tomorrow we're going to open up the class and discuss our friends, our colleagues, the 3 kings, Yeravam, Achav, and Manasseh, upon whom the Mishnah says in Tractate Sanhedrin chapter 11, that Ein Lem Chelik Loyam Haba, they don't have no part in the future world. Reb Ashi says tomorrow we're going to discuss our colleagues. That night, Reb Ashi is sleeping and he has a dream. Who comes to him in his dream? Manasseh. Manasseh says, you call me your friend, your colleague? Tell me, when you cut the bread after Hamaitzi, which part of the bread do you cut first? Reb Ashi says, I don't know. So Manasseh says, you don't even know something so simple. Which part of the bread do you begin with when you cut for a moitzi? Your colleague. So Rabbi says, Manasseh, teach me. Teach it to me, and tomorrow I'll quote it in your name. And Manasseh teaches it to him. Manasseh says, from the part of the bread which developed a crust, not from the middle fresh part, either from the top or from the side or from the bottom, where there's a crust. And this becomes the halacha, this becomes the law in Shulchan Aruch. So Rabbi Ashi tells him, if you were so wise, why did you worship idolatry? And you know what Chizkiah says? If you were there, you would hold up the bottom of your gown and run after idolatry. You would let nothing stop you. If you had a long gown, a long dress, which was obstructing your running, you would make sure to lift it up so that you could run swiftly to worship idolatry. If you were there, Rabashi. And the Gemara concludes, L'machar, the next morning, Amar Luhu L'Rabbana, Rabashi told the rabbis, Niftach B'Rabvasa. We're going to open up our discussion today about our teachers. Manasseh, Achav, and Yeravam were no more our colleagues. They were Rabvasa. They were our teachers. This is very insightful. This means that notwithstanding all of the tremendous criticism against Manasseh, Reb Ashi, none other than Reb Ashi, the editor of the Gemara of the Talmud, who tells us all of the horrible stories about Manasseh, refers to him as our teachers. Rabvasa, our teacher. If so, it's important to pay attention, to pay heed, to listen carefully to what our teacher Manasseh has to say when he's ridiculing Moshe Rabbeinu about the two verses, the verse about Timnah and the verse about Reuven going out into the field. He was wrong. The heavenly voice chastised him. But let's understand what he was saying. For this, of course, we have to get into Timnah a little bit. We have to understand who was this Timnah. Who was this interesting woman, the mother of Amalek, the concubine of Eliphaz, the woman who wanted to convert. Timnah obviously had a very deep sensitivity and yearning to become part of the Abrahamic faith. Timnah, as Rashi puts it here in Sanhedrin Sadik Tesamid Beis, was sensitive to the Yira Shamayim, to the ethical monotheism, to the fear of God, to a relationship to God, which saturated the homes and the culture and the family life of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And as a result of that, she forgoes her royal blood and becomes a concubine to Eliphaz, as I said before. There's something even more. There's a fascinating medrash. Open up, please, your source sheet, your curriculum, source number 5. It's a medrash quoted in Tosfos and Adar Skenim at the end of Vayishlach. Esav ishbiyah Eliphaz b'noi larigas Yaakov. Esav had his son Eliphaz swear to him that he would kill his brother Yaakov because Yaakov took his birthright. And he told him, Eliphaz, if you kill Yaakov, I will be the b'chor, and you will be the firstborn, because you also have the birthright. You're my oldest son. Halach nisyayitzim Timnah imoy. Eliphaz went to consult his mom. He went to consult the mom at Timnah, and what did she say? She said, do not do it, Yaakov will kill you. In fact, if your father would have been able to kill Yaakov, he would have done it himself. Instead, Eliphaz went and he stole all the money from Yaakov. Ani chashav kameis, a poor man who has no money is considered dead, and that is how he fulfilled the oath which he took to his father. Rashi quotes this as well in Chumash. Yaakov came to Mesopotamia, broke. Eliphaz, his nephew, took all his money from him. Esav sees that Eliphaz did not fulfill his instructions to kill Yaakov. So the second paragraph, source number 5, Halach la Amalek ben Eliphaz. He goes to his grandson Amalek. And he tells Amalek, go kill Yaakov. And Amalek agrees. And he takes an oath. Kisheshama Timnah adavar hara. When Timnah heard about this evil scheme, she warns Amalek as she warned her son Eliphaz not to do it. Amalek would not accept it. Amalek is determined to do it. So she tells him, listen, the children of Avram are going to be in exile. If you will kill Yaakov, that debt of exile will be conferred upon you and your children. And the Medrash continues, therefore Amalek did not attack the Jewish people until they left Egypt. After they were liberated from Egypt, they fulfilled the debt. Now it was time for Amalek to fulfill the vow that he took to his grandfather Esav, he or his children or his grandchildren, the family tradition. V'hainu diksiv, the end of the Medrash is Vayavay Amalek. In the end of Vayishlach, when the Jews leave Egypt, suddenly Amalek appears. Good morning. Amalek is here. Welcome. He's here to declare war against the Jewish people. So Timnah becomes a concubine for Eliphaz, and she ensures that both her husband and her son don't follow her father-in-law's instructions to execute Yaakov. But now there's another medrash. Source number 6. Please open your curriculum to source number 6. Tzroir Hamoir. The famous book Tzroir Hamoir by Rabbi Avraham Seva quotes a medrash at the end of Vayishlach. Siba sinas Amalek amru b'medrash she b'sibas tzavos Timnah chos loita. The reason Amalek loathes the Jewish people so greatly is because of a will, a tzavah of Timnah, the sister of Loitan. And he continues, he says, Vateled loyas Amalek v'sipr loyas kol amura. When she gave birth to Amalek and he grew up, she told him the whole story, how she wanted to convert. And she was rejected. So she married, became a concubine to Eliphaz to still be part of the family. And she told him, I want you to harbor this hatred to the Jewish people for eternity. Therefore Amalek declared war against the Jewish people. So it was actually an instruction of tzavah. His mom told him the whole story. She gave everything away to join the people of Abraham. She was rejected by them. Don't forget to hate. And Amalek becomes the arch enemy of the Jewish people. And he's the only character in the Bible who declares war against the Jewish people without any justification. In other words, there is no territorial dispute. There is no fear. Avimelech tells Yitzchak, leave. I'm threatened by you. Pharaoh in Egypt is threatened by the Jewish people. Balak, Bilam. Amalek declares war for no reason. He hates the Jewish people with a passion. He doesn't have anything against them, he just hates them. And he needs them exterminated. The Tzroir Hamoir quotes the Medrash that it's because of what happened to his mother Timnah. There is another very strange medrash, source number 7. Yalkut Shimoini B'Shalach, also the end of B'Shalach. The Yalkut Shimoini says that Eliphaz told Amalek his son, when his son asked him, Abba, mi yodesh ha'olam hazeh v'olam haba. Amalek asked his father Eliphaz, tell me, Tati, who will inherit this world and the next world? Amar lo b'ni Yisrael yorshem ha'olam hazeh v'olam haba. The Jewish people will inherit this world and next world. Tzei v'chafor lehem be'eris. Go dig for them wells, v'haskin lehem adrachim, and pave roads for them. Im tasakein v'yechelkechem apchusim shabam v'tovei le'olam haba. Do this and become a part of the lowest among them. But you'll have a part in the future world. Instead of following his father Eliphaz's advice, he decides to go destroy the world. Shenemar vayavay Amalek Vayishlach. So what is going on here? Who is Timnah? Does she hate the Jewish people? Does she love the Jewish people? She saves Yaakov from the hands of Eliphaz. She saves Yaakov from the hands of Amalek. Yet she also tells Amalek to hate them. She wants to join them and she is rejected, but she doesn't leave. She becomes a concubine for Eliphaz. Eliphaz himself seems to be in a limbo. On one hand, he goes to kill Yaakov. On the other hand, he can't kill him because his wife told him not to. Timnah, his concubine, told him not to, so he takes his money. Rashi says he didn't kill him because he grew up in Yitzchak's home by his grandfather, so he couldn't kill Yaakov. But he takes his money. And when his son Amalek says, Daddy, who will inherit this world and the future world? He says, Bnei Yisrael, the children of Yaakov. What is going on in this family? What is the dynamic? Are these simply medrashim that are arguing with each other and are giving different versions? Or perhaps there is a singular truth which synthesizes and integrates all of these medrashim. Of course, these traditions don't contradict each other. Actually, they complement each other because hate and love, rejection and attraction are opposite emotions, but they're also very deeply connected. Timnah loved Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Timnah wanted to convert, as the Talmud says. She craved it, she yearned for it, she pined for it. But when she was rejected, and the Maharal of Prague explains in Chidushei Agadis, in Sanhedrin Tzadik Tes, why did they reject her? There are many different explanations. One of them that Maharal says is, because she was such an aristocratic woman, she was such a royal woman, they felt she will never be able to be a genuine convert because then she would have to humbly submit to the Jewish faith. Knowing that she comes from a very different place, she would have to be very humble to really join the Jewish people and become part of the Jewish tradition and faith. And they did not think, based on who she was, her blood, her disposition, her character, that she would be able to do it. And when she is rejected, this transfers her emotion from deep attraction to deep rejection, from profound love to profound hate. Because what is she supposed to do now? She is not neutral to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. She is not apathetic to them. She is not cold to them. She loved them so deeply. And on the other hand, she cannot fulfill this love. She cannot materialize this love. She cannot actualize this passion. So what's the solution? The solution is hate, rejection. We know this about many a life. When you're really connected to something, you really love something, you really have a yearning to something, but you could never actualize that yearning for whatever reason. You can't just dismiss it. Okay, it doesn't exist next. It occupies too much space in your life, but you can't have it. So a natural emotion is you start hating it. You want to rid yourself of it. You want to get rid of it. You want to exterminate. You want to destroy it. There's something deeper. Sometimes the very hate is a symptom of the very love, in the sense that you develop a relationship to it, not positively, but negatively. Sometimes I am deeply connected to somebody or to something, but for whatever reason, I cannot access and relate to that love in a positive way. It is too painful, it is too difficult, it is too complicated. I am too fearful, I am insecure, whatever the reason is. But I must have a relationship with it because this is part of who I am. So the way I relate to it and I fulfill my dream of love is by constantly hating it and confronting it and ridiculing it and scoffing at it. If I really hate it, if I really think it's rubbish, as I explained to myself and to other people, why don't I just stop talking about it? Why don't you just calm down and get on with your life? Sometimes you'll see people making fun of something or somebody nonstop. They'll put it down, they'll denigrate it, they'll make fun of people who believe in this or agree to this. If you really feel so truthfully that this is rubbish, so forget, move on with your life. No. You keep on regurgitating, you keep on going back to the same truth again and again. Why? It's part of your essence. It's who you are, and you need a relationship with it. You can't go away. You can't dismiss it and say goodbye to it and bid farewell to it and make believe it doesn't have any space in your life. It occupies not just space in your life, but perhaps it's the nucleus of your life. Perhaps it's part of your very essence. But you're not ready to make peace with it. You're not ready to embrace it. You're not ready to love it. You can't, or you think you can't. So how do you continue your relationship with it? You continue your relationship with it by fighting it, by destroying it, by undermining it, by rejecting it, by ridiculing it, by scoffing at it, by cutting it down, by making sure to cut down anybody who has a connection to this, verbally or any other way, emotionally. And this is your warped, perverted way of loving it. So some people look at you and they say, wow, this guy really is disconnected from this thing or this person. But on a deeper level, the rejection is only a different form of attraction, and the hate is only a different form of love. You're part of me. You will always be part of me. Just the way you're part of me is in a negative way. This is the story of Timnah. Timnah's love gets translated into hate. Amalek, the arch enemy of the Jewish people, didn't come from nowhere. His mother was deeply connected to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. She was not accepted. She becomes a concubine for Eliphaz. And that very energy of love is now reoriented into an energy of hate, into an energy of deep animosity, of deep rejection. And that's the way she deals with rejection. And that's the way she continues to maintain and harbor a very deep relationship and love. She is never neutral to the Jewish people. She could never just say goodbye to an old dream and move on with her life. That's the tragic story of Timnah. And the result is Amalek. She saves Yaakov, but she tells her son to hate them as well. That's the nature of the complex psychology of a person who is conflicted by this very traumatic experience that she had. Now, let's go to Manasseh. Manasseh's father was Chizkiah, one of the most righteous leaders in Jewish history, one of the holiest and greatest kings in the Jewish narrative. Do you know who Manasseh's grandfather was? Manasseh's mother's father was none other than the prophet Yeshaya Hanavi. He was a grandson of Yeshaya. And nonetheless, Manasseh turns out to become, as I said earlier, one of the most evil kings in Jewish history. It is extraordinary to study and try to figure out how did Manasseh become who he became. As we said earlier, Manasseh resurrected paganism in the land of Israel like nobody before him, to the extent that he went into the Beis HaMikdash and he placed there a Tselem Beheichel, a pagan statue. The Gemara says in Sanhedrin of Kov Gimel Amid Beis, he made sure that the pagan statue has a face on all four sides. Why? So that the Shekhinah, the divine presence, should get angry from every angle. Wherever it looks, metaphorically speaking, it should see the face of paganism, of idolatry. The Talmud tells us, Sanhedrin of Kov Gimel Amid Beis, that Manasseh committed promiscuous relationship with his sister, for heaven's sake. And his son Ammon, an apple doesn't fall far from the tree, sometimes, I guess. went a step further. He had relationships with his mother. And if you'll open up source number 8, the Gemara says there in Sanhedrin, his mother told him, can you really enjoy the place from where you once came from? Your mother? Amar le Amain says to his mother, you think I'm doing this for personal enjoyment? Am I doing it for any other reason but to get my Creator angry? I am sinning just to get God angry. No benefit, no enjoyment in a mother, in having a promiscuous, intimate relationship with a mother. I'm doing it to anger my Creator. One of the greatest crimes of Manasseh was the famous Gemara, source number 9, the Gemara in Yevamos, Daf Mem Tesam et Beis. Shimon ben Azai yomer matzasi megillas yuchsim b'Yerushalayim v'kosav ba Manasseh haragas Yeshayahu. Manasseh murdered his own grandfather. Isaiah the prophet, Yeshayahu Hanavi, was murdered by his own grandson, the Judean king Manasseh. The Gemara even continues there to tell the story. Rava tells the story that Manasseh didn't just murder his grandfather in a barbaric way with a barbaric justification. He brought him to court. He scrutinized him. He explained to him why he deserves to die. You want to hear why? The Gemara says in Yevamos, Amar Rava, 3 reasons. Because you're contradicting the Bible, the words of Moses. Moses says, Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu, Parshas Kisisa, Ki lo yirani adam v'chai. No man can see me and live. And Yeshayahu Hanavi prophesies, V'eres Hashem, I saw God. Moshe Rabbeinu tells us in Torah that Hashem is there, B'chol kareinu elav, whenever we call out to Him. And you, my grandfather Yeshaya says, Dirshu Hashem bihi motzai, search for God when He is present. Kro'u b'yosei karev, call out to Him when He's close. God says in Parshas Mishpatim, Es mispar yamecha male, I will fill the number of your days. And Yeshayahu tells Chizkiah's father, Menashe's father, I will add, God will add 15 years unto your life. And he murders his grandfather Yeshaya Hanavi. And that's how the Gemara explains in Sanhedrin, one of the explanations when it says that he filled up the whole Yerushalayim with blood, innocent blood. One of the explanations is that he killed Yeshaya Hanavi. So, it's certain that the topic we are now discussing is inexhaustible, certainly not in one class. There's many, many layers of depth, historical depth and psychological depth and mental and spiritual depth. But let's begin to scratch the surface. There is one obvious point here. And that's what the Gemara tells us in Sanhedrin, source number 10. Sanhedrin Kuf Aleph Amid Bey, Zag the Gemara, source number 10. Chizkiah Melech Yehuda L'chala Olam Kulei Limet Torah L'Manasseh B'nai Loi Limet Torah. Chizkiah taught the whole world Torah. The Gemara says that Chizkiah made a revolution of Torah in the land of Israel. During his day, there was not a child. You could search our child from Dan to Be'er Sheva, from north to south, who didn't know the laws of Taurus, of Tumas and Taurus, of spiritual impurity and purity. The most complicated laws in the Torah, every child knew. Chizkiah revolutionized the landscape of the Jewish world. He taught Torah to everybody. And his own son Manasseh didn't teach. The Gemara wants to understand. Ella mikol Torah shetarach boy, mikol amal shel amal boy lo yaleyu lemutav. Chizkiah put tremendous work into Manasseh. It was burdensome, it was difficult. He toiled at geschwitzt, he sweated in order to inculcate his son Manasseh with Torah. And it didn't penetrate. It was ineffective. To the extent is the famous story in Gemara Masechta Brachas Daf Yud Amud Aleph Chizkiah didn't want to have children. Chizkiah did not want to marry and have children. Why? He told Yeshaya Hanavi, I see that my children will not be good people. And Yeshaya Hanavi told him, don't get involved in the secret calculations of God. What you're told to do, you should do. You have a mitzvah to have children, you must bring children to the world. What happens to them is of God's concern, not your concern. And Chizkiah still tries to circumvent it, and he marries Yeshaya Hanavi's daughter, Chefziba. Why? Because he feels with a mother, like Yeshaya Hanavi's daughter, how bad can the children be? And the Hagoyis Habach, Rabbi Yoel Sirkish, who writes the comments of the Bach, the Bayis Chodesh and Brachas, adds from a manuscript of Gemara that Chizkiah had children. Of course, one of them is Manasseh, and once he was carrying Manasseh and his brother on his shoulders to yeshiva to go study. They were children. And they began scoffing and comparing the head of their father as being a suitable sacrifice for avodah zarah, for idolatry. Chizkiah tried to penetrate his son with Torah, but it didn't enter. It was ineffective. There was a blockage. If anyone knew this, it was Manasseh. If anyone realized the mental, psychological, and spiritual blockage that he was experiencing towards Torah, towards its values, towards its depth, towards its meaning, towards its truth, towards its mystique, and towards its spirituality and its refinement, it was Manasseh. Manasseh was no dumb man. We see later Reb Ashi will call him a teacher. We see later he will learn Teres Kohanim 55 times. But Manasseh experiences an emotional, intellectual, or multi-dimensional blockage to Torah. It's not penetrating. It's not going into. For him, the struggle to embrace Torah transcends every other Jew. For him to be able to have a relationship with Torah is excruciatingly difficult. There is tremendous tension. There is tremendous anxiety. There's tremendous resistance. It reminds you of somebody? Esav. The Torah says, Vayisroitzatzu abana b'kirba, in the womb of Rivka, Esav was gravitating to idolatry. As a child on his father's shoulders, Manasseh was gravitating to idolatry. And yet, Esav was not destined to become a wicked man. If not, we wouldn't blame him. Esav was destined to struggle. Esav was destined to be kovish as Yitzchak, to conquer his negative inclination. Just because you're struggling with something, it doesn't mean you're a loser. It doesn't mean you can't be holy. It just means that your holiness you must experience through a fight. Some people have the opportunity to travel on a serene cruise through tranquil waters of life, and some people, life is a war on the battlefield. Just because you're struggling against heavy addictions, promiscuous impulses, difficult cravings and yearnings, and appetites and instincts, doesn't mean you're destined to failure. It means part of your destiny is to put up a fight and to put up a battle and to struggle through the spiritual gravel and dirt and discover your soul. But that is extremely difficult. So Manasseh develops, perhaps, the exact opposite emotion. He must hate it. He must despise Judaism. He must loathe it. He must denigrate it. He must scoff at it. For only then can he believe that he will find some peace and some harmony. Manasseh was given a lot by his father Chizkiah. And his his hate and his rejection is the opposite of the love and the attraction. He's not neutral to it. Either he's going to love it, and that is very difficult for him. He comes to hate it. And that's how he deals with the love. And that's how he maintains a relationship towards it in a very, very negative way. So now when the Talmud wants to bring out the tragedy of Manasseh, the Talmud doesn't just say he was a bad guy, he was a horrible guy, he was a criminal. The Torah says he used to sit and make fun of Moshe Rabbeinu and show how ridiculous the Torah was through 2 verses. And these 2 verses capture his tragedy. Verse number 1, the sister of Loitan was Timnah. Why did he ridicule this pasuk? Not because he couldn't find any other pasuk that seemed trivial. Because Manasseh was a deep mind and Manasseh was a deep thinker. And Manasseh could not accept the sage's interpretation of this verse, because if he would, his life would have to be very different. What's the story of Timnah? The story of Timnah is somebody who craved to be part of Judaism, but when she could not, when she was rejected, she becomes Eliphaz's concubine, but never makes peace with the fact that she was rejected forever. She never makes peace with it. She never comes to terms with it. She never accepts it. She must hate it and put it down. The second message, Reuven. Reuven would not steal. Reuven will go out during the time of the wheat harvest and not steal. What does this represent? You have yours and somebody else has his or hers. You don't have to take mine to be happy. You don't have to seize my property, my possessions, my position, my personality, my character, my identity, my wheat, my barley, my money, my life, for you to be happy. The tzaddik knows what I have is mine. What you have is yours. We can share, we can appreciate each other. My success in life will not come by me becoming you, by me emulating you. Manasseh breaks down both of these boundaries. For him, thievery is not an issue. You can seize another person's money, you could seize another person's life, you could seize another person's property, you could seize another person's soul. But also on a psychological level, Manasseh can't accept who he is. Manasseh could not accept the struggle that he had to absorb Torah and make peace with it and realize this is who I am and I don't have to become you. I don't have to seize your life, your identity, your personality. Love who you are, love your journey, love your destiny. This is the mission God gave you, and God gave you the exact resources and powers and faculties and attributes for you to be you and celebrate your life and your destiny, which is destined for you to be. You are destined to live a life in which you maximize your own potentials, your own resources. You don't have to emulate somebody else because you don't have their potentials just like they don't have yours. And therefore you don't have to hate them for their success, because that success doesn't belong to you. It's not what you need, it's not what you desire, it's not what you crave. But if you can't accept that, and you can get the other person's identity, and you feel that you want it so much, you develop a tremendous hate. Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov felt that Timnah does not belong here. You continue to serve God in your own way. But she could not accept that. And the result is tremendous negativity, tremendous hate. But there is something that happens to Manasseh. We compare Manasseh to the struggle that Esav had. Esav ultimately was destined to struggle with God, but he became a rush, he became wicked. Manasseh also became wicked. And yet, we know that Manasseh did tshuva. Manasseh repented. The verse in Divrei Hayamim tells us how Manasseh was taken a prisoner to be executed, and he was already being tortured to death, and he discovered God. There's the famous Yerushalmi in Masechta Sanhedrin, which tells us that the Assyrians put Manasseh into a copper pot, and they began to warm it, to heat it from the bottom, and he began burning. And that is how they wanted to kill him. He did tshuva, he returned to God. And the Talmud Yerushalmi says that Manasseh mentioned every idol in the world which he knew. And at the end he said, I remember a verse that my father used to teach me. But when life will become distressed and you'll experience many misfortunes, Manasseh does tshuva. And in the Divrei Hayamim explains, and the rabbis, the sages discuss it in various places, Manasseh was saved from death. And there's a whole story about it. Again, it's beyond the scope of this class, to the extent, source number 11, the Gemara says in Sanhedrin, Daf Kov Gimel Amid Beis, Amar Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi, My diksiv vayishma elav vayechater loy vayeater loy miboyle. It says Manasseh did tshuva and God listened to him and responded to him. But in one version it says vayechater loy, he dug it out for him. What do you mean he dug it out for him? Melamed shasalei HaKadosh Baruch Hu kim in machteres birakia k'tei lekabli b'tshuva b'nei bidas hadin. The attribute of judgment did not want to allow God to accept Manasseh back. So God dug out a tunnel, machteres. He dug out a tunnel through which Manasseh was brought back to Hashem. Or in another version in Yerushalmi, chatar loy machteres tachas kisei hakavod, below the throne of glory. God dug out a hidden tunnel through which he brings Manasseh back to him. It can't be exposed. It can't be visible because they will not let. They will not let. The angels will not let. Midas Hadin will not let. Manasseh you're taking back. Manasseh will repent. And yet transcending everything, God makes a tunnel, a secret tunnel through which Manasseh can do tshuva when he repents. The tremendous hate and ire and anger somehow brings him at the end to a different life. He realizes psychologically the tunnel, the unconscious love and connection that he has to God, that he has to Torah, that he has to his father, that he had to his grandfather, that he has to Judaism, and Manasseh does tshuva. What about Timnah? What about Amalek? We know usually Amalek, the mitzvah is to wipe out Amalek. And yet it says, from below the heaven erase Amalek. And there's an interpretation, below the heaven. And above the heaven, there's some type of source. There's some type of place above the heaven where sometimes Amalek can be transformed. We know the verdict of the Rambam and Hilchas Malachim and the Kesef Mishnah that the commandment to wipe out Amalek is only if Amalek doesn't accept the 7 Noachide laws. If Amalek does accept the Noachide laws, there's no mitzvah to kill Amalek. If he's ready to live a moral and ethical life, not defined by hatred and destruction. To the extent Amalek can even convert, there's a debate about it. In various Talmudic sources, can an Amalekite convert to Judaism? One source says no, one source says yeah. There's a reconciliation that initially not, but if he converts, he or she is a full-fledged Jew. We know the Gemara Masechta Gittin Daf Nun Zayin Mibnei Bonov Shel Haman Arash Shalom Du Torah B'Bnei Brak. The grandchildren of Haman, who was a descendant of Agag, of Amalek, learned Torah in Bnei Brak, so the commentators struggle with it. It seems, according to many opinions, there was conversion. Amalek can be converted. There is some level of transformation. Although in many cases we say not, Amalek has to be exterminated, wiped out. This was the mistake of Shaul Amalek. And yet sometimes there can be a transformation, not mitachas hashamayim, but beyond heaven. Not on the conscious level, but on the unconscious level, to go back to Timnah's original love to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov before it became misdirected and warped and perverted into a terrible hate and animosity that would continue for hundreds and thousands of years to the very core of the Jewish people, where Amalek would not feel happy if there is a Jewish child living in the world. And this, of course, contains a powerful lesson for many of us as well. Sometimes we know within ourselves, or we have friends or we have loved ones, and we see that they have a very deep animosity towards a person, or they have a very deep hate to Torah, to Yiddishkeit, to Yiras Shamayim, to a mitzvah, to Shulchan Aruch, to Judaism. And they feel the need to ridicule it, to scoff at it, to make fun of it, to denigrate it, to put it down. And sometimes you'll see a person who will not stop making fun of Yiddishkeit and not forfeit an opportunity to scoff at it, like Manasseh ben Chizkiah. And at the surface, it may seem that they're so detached, and really one has to know that the detachment is often a symptom of very deep attachment. And the love is actually the hate is the other side of love. The love turned into hate, and the attraction turned into rejection. And what we have to do is chotar loy machteres tachas kisei hakavod. Dig out a tunnel beneath the throne of glory, the invisible tunnel. Go to the deepest depths of their soul, to the deepest layers of their heart and of their mind, and give them healing, give them the love and the depth and the meaning they're really yearning for, but somehow they could not embrace it in a conscious way, and it came out in a negative fashion. But just like Manasseh, dig out a tunnel. Go beneath the layers. And there, even Manasseh can come back and re-embrace his soul, his people, and his God. Have a wonderful night.